This TCU team clearly has issues. What can be fixed and what can they work around over the next few weeks if they're going to salvage this season? We'll talk about that on Locked On Horned Frogs, your team every day.
You are Locked On Horned Frogs, your daily podcast on the TCU Horned Frogs. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Locked On Horned Frogs, your team every day. I'm your host, Steven Simcox. Subscribe to the YouTube channel. You can also find us on your favorite podcast platform. I logged off after the post-game show last night. I took Twitter off my phone. I just had to take a break. It's probably it's on the short list of the most frustrated and embarrassed I've been following a TCU loss. Losing to SMU, it just stinks in general. But the way it went down, giving up 66 points, was just ridiculous. But I know people are upset. I understand that. I'm not going to try to tell you not to be upset. You should be upset. There's still a lot of games to play. There's a lot of weeks in front of this team. And so I wanted to start today's show by discussing, okay, what can be fixed? What was maybe an aberration from yesterday's game or Saturday's game, because you're listening to this on Monday. I'm recording it Sunday night. And what are going to be persistent issues that TCU is just going to have to work around all year long that I don't really see changing, at least not over the next few weeks. Maybe by the end of the season, some of these things get better, but I'm not seeing it right now. So let's start with things that happened yesterday that I do feel like were somewhat unique or that I don't think are going to get replicated week to week. The special teams was bad. A lot of people have pointed out Mark Tramadol, who used to be on staff as an on-the-field guy, now is in more of a consulting role, but is still technically kind of overseeing the special teams. And I believe Casey Petrie was brought on staff to also help with the special teams unit. And so those are the guys that are heading that up. They gave up a punt return for a touchdown yesterday. They almost gave up a kickoff return for a touchdown, if not for the ball carrier stepping out of bounds. And Jordan Bailey had a kick return for a touchdown to open the second half. That was called back for a holding penalty. That ended up leading to, like, the events that happened afterwards led to Sonny being ejected because he was going after the officials. He got 2 unsportsmanlike conduct penalties, and he gets run from the game. So that was bad, right? Special teams was bad yesterday. And they're coming off a week where they did some really impressive things against UCF by blocking 2 field goals and an extra point. And overall, they've been pretty solid this year. I wouldn't say they've been amazing, but the return game's been okay. It's been serviceable. Kicking has been a little bit of an adventure, but I think that's just mainly because you have a freshman kicker. And Ethan Crawl, the punter, is better. Punt coverage, kickoff coverage has been good up until yesterday. So I don't know if SMU saw some things on film. I'm not sure if it was just a fundamental breakdown, but I don't think they're going to get destroyed like that on a weekly basis in the third phase of the game. I feel like the special teams group is actually pretty solid. It was just a bad day against SMU. Defensively, yesterday was super disappointing. Jamie Plunkett from Horned Frog Blitz 247 site pointed out that TCU has now given up 527 yards in the last 2 games. And the UCF game was rough, but, I mean, that's what they do. That's what Gus Malzahn does. Rhett Lashley, obviously a Gus Malzahn disciple. The problem is, I didn't think SMU could replicate what UCF was doing. And it wasn't a carbon copy, but it was pretty close. And it's fairly obvious that teams are just going to jet sweep motion this defense to death and run right at them and try to live in 2nd and 6 and 2nd and 4 and 3rd and 2 like SMU did yesterday and UCF did the week before. And they're going to be like, all right, when you stop it, we'll stop it, right? This week will be a challenge with Jalen Daniels and that Kansas team and their ability to run the ball. And then there will be, more teams down the line that are run heavy and run centric. And I mean, they're going to give TCU fits. Now, from a scheme perspective, one thing I haven't really understood from the past couple of weeks, I think it has something to do with all the window dressing that those two teams were doing in the run game and just their success running the football led to some passive tendencies. But there were a lot of 3-man fronts yesterday. There were a bunch of times where TCU was dropping 8 men back in coverage, but there were still plenty of plays where there was man-to-man situations. They struggled there too. And I just don't get, not a brand new quarterback out there in Kevin Jennings. He's played a decent amount of snaps in his career, but getting one of his first ever starts at this level to not put pressure on him, that didn't make a ton of sense to me. But the big glaring issue is if you can't stop the run, then everything becomes easier. Because then when teams decide to pass, it's catching you off guard. It's putting you in bad situations. And when teams are staying ahead of the chains and in manageable down and distance situations, they can take more risk and they have the whole playbook open to them. But the defense that we saw against Stanford and LIU, but I mean, it's LIU. It just looks like a very different unit than what we saw against UCF and SMU. And it's not just from a fundamental standpoint, even though that's part of it. It's also just from a scheme perspective. So, I mean, it's year one of the Andy Avalos experience. I think there's some personnel issues that he's not going to get worked out right now. But you can allocate more people in the box to stop the run game. And I said this about UCF, and somebody was like, well, you just don't understand football. If you allocate more, defenders in the box, that leaves you susceptible to giving up big plays in the passing game. Yes, it does, but you're already giving up big plays in the passing game. So, what's the risk there? I think there's some changes they could make to be more competitive. The main problem right now is they're not even forcing field goals. I mean, there were multiple times in that game yesterday where the offense was cooking a little bit. And it's like, okay, even if you can just hold them to 3, it could be a big momentum shift in this game, and it can allow this offense to continue to catch up. And Smith had that huge run on 3rd and 12. There was a 3rd and 14 where he scored a touchdown on a little pass play. And there was just way too much of that. And it was huge momentum killers when it would happen. So this defense has its limitations, but I think they can play better than they did yesterday. Here's the big overarching issue, though, that is not going to get fixed in a week. This offensive line is really struggling to run block right now. And they're just getting whipped up front on both sides of the ball. There's not a lot of answers for that. And that's the major red flag that we're seeing right now with this TCU team. And we can go back to, okay, well, it's going to take time to build at this level and get play in the trenches that's competitive. But man, they allocated a lot of resources in the offseason, at least to this offensive line, in hopes that they would be better than last year. And they weren't very good last year. But right now, last year's O-line was better than this group. Amani Bailey ran for 1,200 yards last year. Cam Cook's averaging 3.5 yards per carry. He's got 198 on the year. And I know there's also issues with the running backs, but if you can't block, there's not a lot to do in the run game. So this team's going to have to win games by throwing the football around the yard and getting stops on defense when they need to. And that recipe did not show up yesterday. Unfortunately, it did not show up in the second half against UCF. And while we would love to just be like, hey, just 6 bad quarters of football, I feel like there's a disturbing trend here that is not getting better at the moment. But we flipped the page to Kansas, and we're going to preview that. Before we do that, though, I want to talk about yesterday. A lot of you had questions for me about Sonny, and I'll address some of that now. It's Locked On Horned Frogs, your team every day. I do want to mention one of our great sponsors, FanDuel. Hey, NFL fans, you can start the season with a big return on FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. So when you get a hunch in the middle of the game, you can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more on the same page where you place your bets. You'll get started with $200 in bonus bets guaranteed when you place your first $5 bet. That's FanDuel.com or the FanDuel app. Again, one $5 bet gets you a guaranteed $200 in bonus bets. NFL, Major League Baseball, whatever it is. FanDuel's America's #1 sportsbook. FanDuel is the place to go. FanDuel.com or the FanDuel app. So during yesterday's postgame show, people were mad. I was mad. And a lot of folks in the chat, like the live chat during the YouTube show, were saying, why are you not calling for Sonny's job, right? There was one person in particular that just every 5 seconds was asking me, why are you not doing this? Why are you not saying, like, Sonny has to go? I was super disappointed in Sonny yesterday. I thought getting thrown out of the ball game was ridiculous. I've never seen that in college football. I haven't gotten a clear answer. I'm not sure if we'll get a clear answer from his presser on Tuesday or from the game notes. You know, when somebody's ejected for targeting, they're suspended. Like, if they're ejected for targeting in the second half of a game, they're suspended for the first half of the next game. So is Sonny available for the first half of the KU game? I don't know. I've never seen a college football coach get thrown out. I think the refs were bad yesterday, but I'm not going to use that as an excuse at all because, I mean, TCU got beat. That being said, this is not Major League Baseball or college basketball or NBA where there's a lot of games in the regular season, and sometimes you'll see a coach get thrown out because he's just standing up for his players or because he's like, I'm going to try to light a fire under these guys and show them that I'm fighting for them and I have their best interest at heart, and I'm going to do that by going after this official and making sure they know that I'm in their corner. Try to get, some inspiration. And I guess briefly TCU did show some inspiration. They went down and scored on that drive. Josh Hoover hit Jack Betch for a long touchdown pass, but then the defense couldn't get a stop and everything unraveled. But bottom line is, you got to keep your composure. And Sonny apologized after the game, which I can appreciate, but you can't get thrown out there. It's ridiculous. I'm not happy with where the program is right now. I think the team is kind of soft. And I just feel like the physicality and the mental toughness is not there. And I said yesterday, I was like, if your whole job, because every coach has what they specialize in. Sonny comes from the offensive side of the ball. That's his background, right? Air raid guy. But he's not super hands-on with the offense anymore. He allows his defensive coordinator to do his own thing and coach up that side of the ball. So he is game management guy, CEO guy, in charge of the message of the team, the culture of the team. I would not say this is a team that has a really strong culture right now. We saw a brief, awesome speech by Josh Hoover after the UCF game. I thought that was cool, but it doesn't feel as nice and as awesome when you come out flat against one of your biggest rivals the next week and what's supposed to be a bounce back game. And, there's nothing a coach is going to say after a performance like that that's going to make anybody happy. But he said he was surprised. He was like, I'm surprised. We had a good week of practice, right? And that's frustrating because it's not the first time that he's gone to that explanation of just, we didn't expect this. Well, figure it out. That's your job. Your job is to get the team ready. And if you're not seeing this unfolding in front of you, it just doesn't make any sense. But going back to my original point here at the start of the segment, a lot of you were asking me, why aren't you just calling for his job, right? Well, first of all, I'm here to be a realist, okay? Nothing's happening in the next few weeks. I think there's a slight chance that if this thing just goes completely south, if they lose to Kansas and lose to Houston, and they're not competitive, then yeah, maybe something happens. But I would give that a very small chance. He's going to have the rest of this year to figure it out. So I'm not happy right now. I think the heat on his seat's getting turned up. But that being said, I think there's some things that they can do that would lead them to winning 6 or 7 games. And if you're asking my opinion right now, I'm not telling you this is right or wrong. I'm just telling you what I think. If he wins 6 or 7 games, my feeling right now is that they would give him another year. I know a lot of you are like, they shouldn't do that. That's a fine opinion to have. But that's just my read on the situation. I think they would give him another opportunity to continue to get his players in here, develop, and see what they could do next season. But the other thing is, I have to maintain some level of professionalism here. I can't get on here every week and just call for people's jobs. I get why everybody's mad. Totally understand it. But I think we just got to take a deep breath and let the next couple weeks play out. And if you've already made up your mind about Sonny Dykes, cool. You can express that in the YouTube comments or on Twitter or whatever. I believe he's going to get the rest of the year to see what happens, right? And I'm not telling you things are going to change. I'm not super optimistic right now. But that's where we're at. And yeah, we'll see how this unfolds. I think the biggest concern for me is just the undisciplined nature of the team right now. And they've put a huge emphasis in recruiting cycles on getting this offensive line to a better place. Well, when are we going to start seeing those guys? We see Ben Taylor Whitfield out there, and he's struggling. He looks like a young tackle trying to make it happen. But is next year the year that we're going to start seeing that youth movement there? Or are they going to try to go transfer heavy again? I don't have an answer to that question, but I'm curious to see what they do and how they move there. Again, right now, this just doesn't feel like a really tough and physical football team. And, I mean, some of that falls on the players, but I think a lot of it falls on the coaching staff and what they're preaching and trying to instill on a weekly basis. So, yeah, Kansas this week. We'll see if they can start to bounce back. Another thing that happened against SMU, those turnovers, I mean, it's pretty clear, like, I don't think Josh played particularly well, but I also feel like he was pressing because they were just behind the 8 ball from the jump. I mean, you can't – I said this yesterday. You can't spot a team 28 points and expect to win. It's a recipe for disaster, and yesterday was a disaster. We'll get some of your thoughts next. It's Locked On Horned Frogs, your team every day. If you need tickets, check out the Gametime app. Gametime is the best place to buy tickets on the secondary market. Use the promo code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Again, it's LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. One of my favorite things about the Gametime app, they give you a view of when you sit down. So there's a picture that shows you this is what it's going to look like from your seat. Also, there's no hidden fees. There's some fees, but there's no hidden fees at all. It's going to tell you exactly what it is, and you go to checkout, and you're not going to get surprised by why am I suddenly paying $50, $60 more. Gametime app, it's super simple, easy to use. Official sponsor of the Locked On Network. We appreciate them being with us here on the Locked On Network. So some reaction to yesterday. A lot of you talking about how you're done with the coaching staff. Yeah, I get it. I mean, yesterday was bad, and it was just rough from the jump. Terry says the sad thing about Sonny arguing with the refs or Big 12 refs. Yeah, they were. They had a rough day, though. There were some questionable calls, but also TCU couldn't get out of their own way. Jacob says refs did have a terrible day. I also would have been injected, so I empathize with that. But so did TCU, and we lost. Yeah, I mean, there were some bad calls, but also you just can't get destroyed like that. It's just a rough deal. We'll see how they bounce back this week, man. You know, I think, like, I thought Saturday would go a lot better, obviously. But the cool thing about the football season is there's always another chance to respond. So this defense, can they get to a better place? Kansas is an interesting team. They're 1-3. They've lost a lot of one-possession games. They lost to West Virginia. I think West Virginia is a pretty solid team. They lost to UNLV. UNLV is a Group of 5 team, but they're one of the better Group of 5 teams in the country. And they lost to Illinois, who is a pretty solid team in the Big Ten. They beat Nebraska last Friday night. So I don't think Kansas is like this hapless team, but they're also playing way below expectations. And yeah, this is two teams. I'll talk to Derek Johnson, the Kansas Locked On host, at some time this week. These are two teams that are just trying to get off the mat. Like, they're both struggling. They're both kind of teetering. And so I think it's a big game for whoever wins has some hope to really salvage this thing. Whoever loses could be headed in a rough direction. So we'll have coverage all week long. My pal Matt Jennings is on with us tomorrow. It's Locked On Horned Frogs, your team every day. We're free and available wherever it is you get your podcast.